Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to continue our discussion of the offense against the Jaguars on Sunday Night Football and that very satisfying 23-7 win. And here to do that with me is Frazier Tafar. Frazier, how you doing?
Doing good, Ken. Glad to be back for part two. Just interesting to see how the individuals lined up this week and looking to drive straight into the offensive line and looking at left tackle first.
Okay. We could do that right away. I'll talk about the offensive line at a high level. Was responsible for 2.5 of the 3 sacks as I scored it. They had another half sack from a free rusher where there was some phone boothing in the pocket coincident to that. They had 2 quarterback hits they allowed. Surprisingly few pressures. There were 4 pressures, but obviously there were a fair number of times that Lamar went to the turf in this game, which was not good. And then 3 penalties, that's something that has been a problem, particularly on the left side of the offensive line this year, with Stanley and Simpson both having significant problems with penalties. If you didn't listen to the first episode, we talked a little bit about that Simpson penalty, so we're probably going to go light on him in the second episode. But that was a big problem. That was an ugly, ugly penalty.
Yeah, definitely didn't need to happen. Just that was a boneheaded play.
Yeah. Let's jump in right on Stanley. It continues a very difficult season with what was his worst game of the year. He sat out 22 snaps. Most of those were after the concussion protocol hit on the pull. So he moved over to pull. He went helmet thumb, and I actually surprised Aluakon, I think, who took the hit on that play, didn't go out as well at that point, because it certainly looked like his chance for concussion was pretty high from where the hit was. Collinsworth made the point that it might have been related to his knee, that he wasn't able to kind of get low enough in order to hit that player at the right spot. And I know, Frazier, you have offensive line experience from your high school days. Does that hold water?
Yeah, I think when you don't have that kind of mobility, it makes you a little more tentative in the way you attack. So even though he was going up against a smaller player, it makes you think twice about how you go about it.
All right. 2.5 pressures, 1 quarterback hit, parts of 2 sacks, a 1/3 share of one, a 1/4 share of another, and an offensive hold. That is no way to get through a football game where you only play 47 snaps. So he missed 6 blocks. Now here's a really bad number in addition. All 6 of those losses, all 6 of those missed blocks were losses at the line of scrimmage. It makes things not as bad when you move to level 2 and can't find a block, where you pull maybe and you can't find a block. But in these cases, these were all losses at the line of scrimmage to the man opposite him, basically having his way with him in some way that I didn't think was very good. So 1 block in level 2, 1 pancake. He made 3 of his 4 pulls, and he would have had 4 for 4 if he hadn't held on the pull where he basically wrapped his arm around the helmet of that opponent.
Yep. And on the missed blocks, or the plays he got beat inside, the ones I found were on the first drive of the game. He got beat inside on the second rush of the game by, what was it, 95?
Allen. It was 41 beat him by bull rush on the second play of the game.
That was really bad. And then I think it was on the same drive, Stanley went right to the second level without contesting Allen, and Allen went right to Keaton Minchin, and that forced Lamar to hold the ball on a QB read. So things like that.
Yes. I gave him a 0 on that play, and I have unable to fend off 95. So he might have been down blocking on that play, which allowed, usually you let that end rusher in, and that's who Jackson reads off of.
Mm-hmm.
But he had the correct read, and obviously it made it difficult in this particular case. But that first drive was horrendous for him. At a -2 on a pressure allowed to Allen, another shared pressure by bull rush to Allen, and then he finished it off with a quarterback hit by Allen that led to an intentional grounding penalty.
Yep.
So that was one bad drive.
Yep, pretty bad. I think you could say he quote unquote settled in the rest of the game, but it was too pretty the rest of the way.
Yeah, that wouldn't really be true. Yeah. So 1 block in level 2, 1 pancake, and let's see. He made 3 of his 4 pulls, but because he got a -6 on the penalty on one of those, he ends up with -3 points on 4 pulls, which is obviously not what you want. 1 highlight, an F. To give you an idea of how bad an F it was, he was 0.17 short of a D minus. So you need a 60% score in terms of points per total block to pass and get a D minus. He was at 43 after adjustment, and I gave him a very hefty 0.08 adjustment for facing Josh Allen. The maximum I ever give is 0.10. So I think that I'm more than fair in terms of the grading here, unfortunately. And boy, the Ravens need to get it figured out in terms of what's happening with Ronnie Stanley, whether or not he can actually play this year. Do you see them going to even more rotation or maybe sitting Stanley a game here?
I would think sitting Stanley a game would definitely be beneficial. It's almost like, knock on wood, if we get the first round bye, I think we almost need to give him close to 3 weeks rest for that first playoff game, because I mean, this is not something that's going to heal overnight, and giving him close to a month off potentially can pay dividends in that. But like you said, moving forward, it's something we definitely need to reinvest and reevaluate going into the offseason.
Yep. $8 million cap savings if they cut him before next year. It's not something I want to see. I want a healthy Ronnie Stanley playing like he always was. It's just a really unfortunate injury history that has dogged him really ever since he signed the contract. And obviously those kind of contracts, when you sign them, they're a big investment by the franchise, and you need to get a return out of that. I don't know if I really blame the Ravens for this, but they have constantly during this period been obviously trying to hustle Ronnie back to the field when he obviously is not 100% right. And maybe the feeling is just he's never going to get 100% right. And they got to get whatever they can. They got to get out of him this year. That wouldn't be an unreasonable position to take, particularly with the dire straits the Ravens would be in if he were not available for the playoffs. But it's also one that's kind of cruel to the athlete in terms of what he's done for the organization or whatnot, particularly when he's playing on his first 5 years with the team.
Yeah, just overall a really tough situation. I think there's going to be a lot of business decisions made coming up soon.
Let's see. I think we're done with Stanley. Then let's move on to John Simpson. He played well with the exception of that boneheaded penalty at the 1 yard line, just a worse place because you have asymmetric penalties, of course, at that point. And he gets a 15-yard penalty for headbutting the Wingard, who knew what to do right away. He went down immediately. It was a flop. We'd agree, right? Yep.
I mean, he baited him. I mean, it was from the beginning of when he started pushing, you can tell that was what he was waiting for.
Well, I as we've seen Odell Beckham do it to opponents consistently this year in terms of some really dirty stuff that Beckham has done on it in terms of stepping on a defensive lineman's hand in order to draw that kind of a penalty. So I can't say we can complain too much about Wingard doing it to the Ravens, but that would have potentially been a great play for Jacksonville if they'd have been able to hold the Ravens. But of course, Lamar then saved the day and tossed the ball to likely an unbelievable, beautiful throw on the very next play.
Yep. Amazing.
1.5 pressures allowed by Simpson. And this is the dichotomy of this is he actually played a pretty darn good game other than that stupid penalty, but 1.5 pressures, 5 missed blocks. 2 of those were losses at the line of scrimmage. Neither of that totals is too bad. 5 missed blocks, maybe a tad above average for a guard where maybe you'd hope for 4, but 2 losses at the line of scrimmage is not terrible. Your 1.5 pressures is right about where the acceptable level is. And it's a 69 snap game. So he has more time to make up for his mistakes or more snaps for him to spread his error value out of is another way to think of it. He went 11 of 14 on his polls in this game, which is really good, by the way. That's been something he's improved on as the season's gone on. But then you look at it's the penalty actually occurred after he pulled. So he pulls into Wingard. Wingard baits him, and then he takes a 9-point negative adjustment to his score from going after Wingard on the personal foul. Wow. 4 blocks in level 2, 1 pancake, 2 highlights, a D for the game. It's his worst game actually of the year by scoring. He's been right in that moderate range, but this one was his worst single score of the season. Let me confirm that because I almost feel like he had one game that was worse than that. But I'll have to look at that and just confirm that really quickly.
If you take out the penalty, what would you score it in?
This is third worst game. Sorry. If you take, that's a great question. So I take out the penalty. Let's see. He picks up 9 points. He would have gotten the credit for the block there. So he'd be up to 58. And it'd been 58 out of 69. Mm-hmm. And that would have been 0.84. And then I would have given a 0.03 adjustment as he did get, which would have moved it to 0.87. He would have gotten a B.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's his third worst game of the year. He has had several in the D range this year. So, not quite his worst, but not good either.
Okay. So with that being said, what did you think of Linderbaum?
Yeah. I can we stick with Simpson and that penalty for just 1 second?
Sure.
The one thing I want to say about this is that PFF will probably only give Simpson a -1 on that penalty. Instead, they have a 0 to -2 scale. Sorry, a +2 to -2 scale that underlies the grades that you can see on PFF that show up as 1 to 100 grades or 0 to 100 grades. That underlying scale, I believe they only give a -1 for a penalty. And to give you an idea, they have other offsetting blocks that he might get +0.5 on, and he might accumulate 6 of those in a decent blocking game. That would be 3 times as important as penalty. This is a situation that's come up often in discussions is why should one penalty drag down a score like that? And the answer is because of 2 things. One is leverage of the situation. And obviously, a 15-yard penalty is a huge problem and in this particular situation, but that wouldn't matter. If it had been in midfield and driving the right back to the 35, it would have been the same -9 that I would have assessed him. But the other part is that when several players make a block in order to make a run play work, there's a lot of credit to dole out on that play. So giving +0.5 to 2 different offensive linemen, and then your fullback also, and then your running back gets a share, and maybe your quarterback handed off the ball and it was a good mesh point read and whatnot, and somebody else got faked out that way. There's a lot of credit to be handed out when a play goes well, and it might only be a 6 or 7 yard gain on that. Got to be really careful not to pyramid those gains. When you have a penalty like that, and in particular this one that's after the play, there is nobody else responsible for that except for Simpson. Yep. It's a 15-yard change of field position, that is 100% Simpson's responsibility. If it happened during the play, it could have negated the play itself, which would have additional option valuation. So when I get this question often, I feel like I want to answer it, but there's no way I can answer it and give it the justice it deserves on a 280 character Twitter response. So I have to do it on the show like this and go through it in a little bit more detail. So we said we wouldn't beat on Simpson, but it ended up we couldn't avoid it because it's like the perfect example of running a stop sign or whatnot that becomes a case in terms of what your liability is.
Very true.
All right. So we're ready to move on to Linderbaum, right?
Yep.
See, he was the best of the Ravens linemen in this game. It was one of his best games of the season. I'll just go pull up my score sheet here as well. But he had 69 plays, made 62 of those blocks, and he missed 7, but didn't have any negative events. Now, that's pretty much the deal for a center. If you can avoid the negative events, you can avoid pressures, you can avoid giving up any kind of usually shares of pressure events oftentimes with a center. That's really valuable. You're much more likely to give up full elements of pressures when you're on the outside, particularly at tackle, but on the inside you're often helping somebody on a block, or maybe there's a pressure up the middle, phone boosts the pocket, or the pocket is otherwise compromised such that you don't get the full pressure yourself. But anyway, Linderbaum, no negative events in this game. There's 7 missed blocks. 3 of those were losses at the line of scrimmage. They weren't good. He was getting bullied a little bit on some plays there. He went to the ground a couple of times. And then there's one other that I've started to score this year is when a player is illegally downfield on a pass and he does not get flagged for it. I still give him a 0 in terms of blocking on the play. And the reason is that you create an extraordinarily costly penalty if you are caught for that. If you get flagged, it's 5 yards, which is something, but it's also the option for the defense to either accept the play or not. So they can accept the turnover, or the sack, and they can not accept it if it's a 15-yard gain. So you really cost your team a lot when you put them in a bad position when you give the defense an option on the play. So in that case, he got lost his block on one play because of an IDP foul that he was not flagged for.
And that's probably one of my unfavorite offensive lineman penalty is the legal man downfield. I think, it's hard to time an RPO. I think the quarterback has to be really smart in the timing.
Yep.
And Lamar is one of those guys that's really smart. I mean, if he doesn't see it within 2 seconds, he's going to tug and run because he can do that. We haven't seen too many of those get called this year. Maybe, 2-3 times all year, maybe. You're muted, Ken.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if it's 3 to 4 for the Ravens. I'd have to actually look it up. It's available to you on the NFL GSIS website. You can actually look at that. We're going to do a series this offseason, I think, in terms of what resources are available to fans in terms of getting information that you'd want. And young writers are often, they just are not, they don't avail themselves of all the information out there. There's terrific information for free out there that you can go get and go look for without even having to pay subscription prices for.
Wow, definitely look forward to that.
Let's continue with Linderbaum. 6 level 2 blocks, 6 out of 6 on poles, 3 pancakes, 0 highlights. That's just fantastic.
Yep.
Tons of mobility. His poles all went good. He had 3 pancakes. He did get on the ground at least once in the game. Looking back over the sheet here, no highlights. Not a big problem at all. He didn't have a combination block that I thought was worthy of a highlight. Normally, that's where centers pick them up. They start by helping the guard get tee up the guard with his man, to leave him behind, move to level 2, and particularly with the Ravens and the quickness of Linderbaum climbing, they rely on that very heavily. But he didn't have any. Not one of them was specifically a highlight, but still A for the game, 0.93 score, and again having a really good season, and pass blocking improvement with him is the big thing. By the way, if you look at the PFF score for this game from Linderbaum, they don't have that high an overall score for him because he had a good pass blocking game and not as great a run blocking game as they scored it, which meant that they're because of the 85-15 weighting they do for pass and 85 run and 15 pass. They undervalue what he did as a pass blocker in this game, in my opinion. So it's interesting, but I thought he had a much better game than that overall, and that's the reason why you'd see a difference between they have him in the low 70s and I have him as an A. Yeah,
I had no issue with Linderbaum in this game. I think he was solid. He's been our best offensive lineman all year next to Zeitler, so just a regular performance for him.
You mentioned the IDP thing. So when you were playing in high school, did you have film that you would watch after the games, and the coach would ever get on you for being IDP on a play?
Well, my team ran the wing T offense, so there was no such thing as a legal man downfield. We were either running the ball down your throat or running the ball down your throat. So
okay, gotcha.
That.
That's interesting. Okay, so a lot of old school football stories, I'm sure, involved in that are kind of interesting. Yeah. The guy I want to have on the show sometime is, I don't know if you've ever read a little bit about this, but the A11 offense that some high schools in New England are running, a couple different schools.
Never heard.
Okay, so normally you are required not only to have 7 guys on the line of scrimmage, but to also have 5 of them wear ineligible numbers.
Mm-hmm.
But the one type of play where you're not required to do that is a scrimmage kick formation. So when you're in punt formation, for example, you can have everybody be an eligible receiver number if you want. You have a bunch of tight ends and long snappers in the 40s and other numbers that are eligible numbers. But normally, in a normal offensive snap, you have to have 5 guys with numbers in the 50s, 60s, or 70s that are ineligible, and they're on the field at that point. If you don't, it's illegal. So the A11 offense runs every offensive play from a scrimmage kick formation.
Wow.
and so they have to do something. They have to do something special to do it, including having 2 shotgun quarterbacks at the same time.
Wow.
So and then they do other thing, but every play is run from a scrimmage kick formation. I always thought that would be a great guest to have on the show to explain kind of some of the ins and outs. There is a website about it out there, and one of the things that they point out to is anybody who wants to run this A11 offense, you really need to have a training session for the officials to understand what you're doing. And they do that in the NFL, by the way. The officials come to each clubhouse about an hour before the game or so, and they say, look, you got anything special going that we need to be aware of? And you want maybe a private letter ruling, is it be from the IRS that you get in advance of this, or tell me, is this legal? But also a let us know what's coming so we don't accidentally throw the wrong flag on the play and look stupid. And so both teams have an opportunity to do that. So I think it's a good practice, but their thing was bring the officials to your practice, let them watch and see how you're doing this for a couple hours, and then they'll figure it out. But I can't even imagine trying to run that offense having officials who don't know at that level.
Yeah.
Trying to basically throw flags. So.
I would definitely look it up. A11, that's interesting. It kind of makes me think of the 2014 New England Patriots game when they exposed the Ravens on the eligible tackle downfield.
Absolutely hated that. So that was a difference of opinion, and I think Harbaugh might have actually been right. But I believe they changed the rule that when a player is shifting from eligible to ineligible on a by play basis, that requires allowing the defense to substitute for that. So that was the question that came up, I believe, on that. I may be wrong about it, but that's what I recall being the question. And Harbaugh eventually, got so frustrated he decided to create a personal foul on himself that would force the officials to come over and talk to him about it.
I mean, that was very frustrating, especially because, I mean, those plays pretty much brought them back in the game because they were seeing plays right up to, there were 20-plus yard plays, so they weren't easy plays to not care about. So I can understand why Harbaugh was frustrated.
That was definitely. I mean, the Ravens have played the New England some very tough games in the playoffs. They beat the crap out of them twice in the playoffs, and they lost 2 close games by 3 points. And both of those are among the worst worst defeats period in Ravens history. The Lee Evans drop and Cundiff miss, and then this BS with the on and off of Palomaliano, or I can never pronounce his name exactly correctly, but the tight end for the Patriots.
Yeah, it was tough. 14 was probably the one that hurt the most because it was after the Super Bowl year, obviously, and with 11 we had the redemption the next year, so we didn't really have to labor that too much. But that 14 game that team was really good, so it was tough to see that.
They were right there. They were ready to compete for it. So I guess we move on here to Kevin Zeitler. He's on a streak of really fine games. We've been talking about this week after week. He had a 1/4 share of a sack. That was his only negative event. 8 missed blocks in the game. That's kind of a lot for a guard, but again, 69 snaps. So you get a little more opportunity in that. 4 losses at the line of scrimmage. Not perfect again. But he did generally pretty well. 6 out of 6 on pulls, 4 blocks in level 2, 0 pancakes, 2 highlight combination blocks in his case. He gets a B for the game. I think he was 86 or 87 after adjustment. So right in the top middle of the B range for a guard. So another good game from Zeitler. He's had all but one of his games since week 4, and this is a 12 game period. Sorry, week 4. No, it's a 12 week period, 11 game period. All but one of his games, 10 out of 11, have been an A or a B. So he's having a remarkable year. I saw that one of the radio stations locally was putting out who's the MVP for the Ravens after Lamar. And they said there's just nobody to choose from. Tyler Linderbaum, Zay Flowers, and Gus. And my response is, why isn't Zeitler on this list? He's been every bit as good a player as Linderbaum has been this year. Not better, not worse, just every bit as good. That's what I would say. Linderbaum's been a tremendous revelation. Zeitler has been a tremendous in-season comeback story. It's great to see him. And now, I think he's put himself in a position where the Ravens will have to consider re-signing him just to retain some level of line integrity. I don't know if they have the money to do it.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be tough to get Zeitler back for another year, but he is putting on a really good season. Like you said, he did have some struggles in the beginning of the season, but he's came on very strong in the last half.
Yeah. All right. Morgan Moses, on the other hand, not a good game. He had his worst game of the year. He may be hurt. He sat for 33 snaps. I know he's dealing with an injury, and apparently dealing with a injury to his arm that's not letting him fully extend here. That appears to be an ongoing issue. But the fact that he sat 33 snaps, it may be a load management issue, as I think you mentioned in the first half of the show, right?
Yep.
or it may be a case where he might be more hurt than they let on because he missed the end of the game. Now, the nice thing about that is if you're going to have to play Daniel Fa'alele for some period of time, get him out there when you're running the football.
Exactly.
He at least knows how to get into the body of an opposing defender and try and push him around a little bit. And frankly, the Jaguars at that point in the game were playing a lot of brother-in-law football. They did not want to get pancaked or, rolled up in the game at that point. And that was a bigger concern for them, particularly on the last drive after they failed to score with 3:19 to go. Mm-hmm. That last drive, they really weren't playing very serious defensive football at that point. So it's good to see Fa'alele get some time in the game. So anyway, Moses allowed one full quarterback hit. He allowed 2/3 of a sack that he shared with Stanley. Stanley allowed the phone booth to be the pocket to be phone booth on the play by one of his kind of standard mirrorings, but Moses actually lost control of his guys. So he got 2/3 of that sack. So, otherwise I thought he had another play where Jackson over retreated in the pocket with McCary and I believe Moses it might have been Fa'alele on the field where I didn't charge either of them for a pressure because Jackson retreated some absurd amount of yardage from the line of scrimmage, like a 15 yards from the line of scrimmage before any pressure had occurred. So you're not even giving a chance for a pocket to occur, and your tackle can't continue to block somebody like that without having a good sense of where the quarterback is and how he has to set out, how he has to set up. And so you allow that defender to move laterally off you right at Jackson. And neither player got charged in that particular instance.
And that might go back to the point where Lamar maybe not trusting the offensive line enough. With Daniel Fa'alele in there, he has to kind of get a little jumpy in the way he maneuvers in the pocket.
Yeah, Fa'alele has had a tough start to his career in terms of the percentage of plays. How about pass blocking snaps per sack allowed? It's been very high. So I'll have to have that number ready the next time we have the show or not, but it's quite bad. So Moses allowed, in addition to the one quarterback hit in the sack, was a false start he had. So he's the third guy to have a penalty in this game, along with Simpson and Stanley. 4 missed blocks. 3 of those were losses at the line of scrimmage. So definitely not his best game, particularly since he only played 36 snaps. 4 level 2 blocks, 1 pancake, 2 out of 2 points on polls, and he had 1 highlight. It was a D- for the game. In this case, a 0.60 was his score after adjustment. So he and Stanley really had tough games, and they did not get it done in this one.
Yeah, and like we kind of notioned in the previous show, it might be a scheme thing that we have to figure out and setting up our tackles for success, especially if we're going to potentially move with Fa'alele moving forward. I think we can't run the ball every down, so we got to figure out how to help them in pass pro.
Yeah, they did a lot of YY sets with the tight ends, where and when I mean YY, that could actually mean that a tight end was detached from the line of scrimmage. But in these cases, they were in line tight ends on both sides. Who were outside the tackles. So they did some of that. And I they did a good amount with Hill. It wasn't like they didn't try. And, we saw that we talked about the 0.70 set and chip blockers per pass play. But the options eventually run out on that at some point. Your tackle has to be able to block on an island and not give up, not get bowled right into the pocket play after play.
And we've came in that issue during the matchup show trying to figure out the keys to the game because it seems to be the same key over and over again. Can the tackles hold up against pass rush? And until we figure out that story, that is probably the biggest weakness of this team right now.
Yeah.
Easily do what you see.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No, absolutely no doubt about it. No. And they've gotten by with so many other weaknesses. I mean, think of where this team was at the start of the year. It looked like we had 2 healthy tackles because we didn't know yet.
Yeah,
about Stanley and about Stanley in particular. Moses had a good year, but if in the case of Stanley, we didn't know. But where we were really concerned was cornerback. Oh boy, how are we going to get through this?
I know.
And now cornerbacks, this deep position that they barely had an injury the whole year at corner. Ardarius was lost, so I don't want to minimize that because it was significant. But they've dealt without having Pepe. Yeah. Brock Ya-Sin has not even got on the field very much, but when he has played, he's played pretty well.
Yep.
Darby's played fantastic, and there's no room in the inn for him. The Humphrey has improved his play since he came back, I thought, and of course Stevens turning into a number one cornerback. Who would have ever thought? So
no one would ever thought that. I think his development has been the key to our season at this point.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Daniel Fa'alele, and he allowed another sack in this game. So he's got quite a track record of giving up sacks, but he did play 33 snaps, and that sack was the only negative play he had. Incredibly, Daniel Fa'alele scored a C in this game.
Wow.
That is his first ever non-F in scoring that I've ever had. And I wanted to bring back all the times because not been that many times which he's had the minimum number of 20 snaps necessary to get a grade. But this year he's done it twice. And the first game was an F. He had a 0.33 base score, an adjustment of 0.06, so 0.39. That's not going to get it done. This time it was 0.70 with 0.04 adjustment, so that's a C. And I'm going to bring up the 22 totals for that because he was just awful in the 22 season for the games he played. And let's get down to it. So he played 50 snaps against New England in week 3 to a 0.51. He played against Buffalo in week 4. He almost did it, but he got 0.57, so he's just 3 points shy of and still an F. And then against Denver in week 13, played 32 snaps, 0.03 points per play with an adjustment of 0.04. So that was what I call a fall off the table F. It's not quite the worst scored game ever by all time. There have been a couple of games that have been negative in terms of points per play. But anyway, Fa'alele, tough career, and actually ought to be celebrating after a game like this, even though he gave up a sack. This is the best he's ever played in a game.
And I think, like you mentioned earlier, the run game definitely let him get to the point where he has his advantage at play, being able to lean on people, use that size that we coveted so much, but you can't translate it to pass pro. So I think if he can continue to build on this performance, and like I've said in previous shows, he needs to go into every single game like he's going to start. He needs to prepare vigorously every single game. I mean, I'm not saying he's not fit or not conditioned, but it doesn't hurt to continue to make sure that you're able to be agile and available for the team, because I don't want to see Ben Cleveland at right tackle.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm not as opposed to seeing Ben Cleveland at right tackle. I'm really not. I'll for one thing, how about we find out who Ben Cleveland is? I mean, Daniel Fa'alele, I think we can all agree he needs live fire snaps, but he needs more than that. He needs coaching to figure out if he can get his technique in place. I mean, the big problem with Fa'alele to me is he doesn't use his hands at all. He should be a violent, physical, George Foreman-esque puncher out there, and he's not. He's this timid kind of patty cake lineman who seems to have an aversion to hurting the man opposite him. And I have a problem with that in an offensive lineman. I think he's going to have to go to school and learn to do that. Or I think that would be the place for him to go to an offensive line school during the off season. Because you want to go someplace where they have players actually opposite you, and it's not just footwork training, and it's not just hand placement and whatnot. It's got to really be about how do you punch, where do you go, where do you strike, where's the other player vulnerable, how can I best throw off his pass rush plan by striking first. Because I mean, one thing that just nothing better for ruining the pass rush plan than to basically get that guy off balance. That will detract from his Euro step or spin move that he had planned.
Yep, and I think the one thing that kind of deters me from having Cleveland on the outside as a tackle is he has guard tendency in the sense of letting the rusher get inside of him, and early in his career he was using his head to control the bull rush, which was really bad. And that was the reason he had concussions most of the time in the beginning of his career. I'm curious to see if he has that coached out and he's able to sustainably block people and not have to use means that are illegal to block people. I think if putting him out on the tackle and him having to be a Stanley catch and anchor kind of guy, I don't think that bodes well for him.
If you found $100 bill on the ground, you wouldn't walk past it. So don't pass up on a chance at easy cash with MyBookie. MyBookie has the biggest online selection of odds and contests to fill all your sports betting needs anytime, anywhere. So you can turn that sports knowledge into cash in your wallet. Bet the NFL, college bowl games, or play for a share of big cash prizes in weekly blackjack tournaments. And if you've been waiting for the right time to get in on the action, that time is now. Make your winning move today. Sign up at MyBookie and use the promo code RAVENS to claim your deposit match, redeemable up to $1,000. Again, that's promo code RAVENS to claim your bonus. Experience the thrill of sports betting right from the comfort of your home. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere with MyBookie.
Is a pretty decent chance it wouldn't work. But I put on your general manager hat for a second. You've got a guy in year 3 who you used a 3rd-round draft pick to draft originally. And I don't think that matters, by the way, anymore. It is a sunk cost. But you also have a guy in year 3 who you have for a year still signed. Maybe look at it that way. Your offensive line, if you're talking about who's going to be here next year, you might be down to Linderbaum and Moses of the current 5 guys. It could be Linderbaum, Moses, and Simpson, and several of the guard guys could still be around competing. Mustafer could be around, and other guys could be around competing for that guard spot. But how about you find out what you have with Cleveland? Whether you stick him in at guard in Week 18 or whether you stick him in at tackle in Week 18 for what will hopefully be a meaningless game.
Yeah, I would love to see him at left guard. I would just love to see that action, just to see how he does, because I think John Simpson is serviceable. He can get the job done, but we want to see someone take the edge off that position. And I think naturally Ben Cleveland is a right guard. So I think maybe the transition going to left is kind of harder for him, but he's had about 2.5 years to sit down and learn it. So I think now is the time for him to maybe implicate that skill.
It's an interesting quandary that the Ravens have, because they have Saleh, Faalele, and Cleveland are all really still developmental players in some sense. Because Cleveland, I mean, it's a matter, honestly, of trust, I think, with him and Harbaugh and whatnot, and the fact that they list him at 370 pounds now tells me they're being punitive about how they want to report weight on the player. I think he did weigh 370 at one point. I think he probably doesn't weigh 370 now, and they're still leaving him there because they're pissed off at him for showing up so fat after he got married.
Yeah.
And it's the kind of thing that obviously he's lost the trust of Harbaugh. It has been notoriously difficult to gain back once lost with a lot of different players, I think, around the league and around the team rather. And then if you make him a developmental player, one of the things the Ravens are going to want to do is to find a developmental left tackle in this next draft if they don't actually find a plug and play first year left tackle.
Yeah.
But it could be even if it's a 2-year player, it adds another developmental player to your roster, and you can only carry 9 guys realistically among offensive linemen on your roster. You really can't carry 10. So if you do that, then you don't have room. You have room for 2 guys who aren't going to be active on game day, or I guess they are carrying 10 right now, aren't they? Because they've got Mustafa and Saleh.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess you can carry 10, but if you the point is you only have 2 guys you can sit every week on the inactive list, and that's still a heavy usage of your inactive group to have these developmental tackles. So anyway, it's tough. This is going to be a really tough season for some younger offensive linemen who haven't yet panned out for the Ravens.
Yeah.
All right. I did want to give you grading on McCary. I actually graded him pretty well, and PFF didn't. So I have a request in to find out what did they really not like about the game. And he only had 22 snaps, so it wouldn't surprise me if there's a pass blocking snap where they saw something they really didn't like, and I didn't pick up on it. But before I report grading on that, I wanted to make sure I had closed the loop on this. And gone back and looked at any A22 they point me in the direction of. But that's one thing I like to do is when there's a huge difference between the two of us, and there have been some big ones recently. I had Stanley for 4 pressures last week. They had him only for 1 initially. They've changed 1 since. But I like to communicate directly and see if there's a reason why we have this. And oftentimes it's just definitional, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. And when it's not definitional, I want to understand it. what did they really think was so bad about that play?
Yeah, and I think McCary had overall, like you said, a good game. I know one play comes into mind when he had a highlight block on a pull. I think he springed Justice Hill open in the third quarter. I forgot what play, what drive, but
yeah, he had a pull in the third drive of the game on the second play, which was a 6-yard gain.
Hill.
Let me see. I can't tell you that because I don't have the running back noted.
Okay.
And the only other pull he had was a miss. So I think it was probably that play. So the third drive, second play is what I guess it is. It's a 6-yard gain. I couldn't tell you who was in.
Okay. Yeah. It was just a good pull, good impact block. I think continuing to see him, we know that he's serviceable. We know that he can do his job. It's just against the all-pro rushers that we're scared that he can hold up.
All right, let's move on and talk about some individual skill position players here. And you know the drill by this point, Frazier. So go ahead and who do you want to talk about first?
I want to talk about Bateman. I think, like you mentioned in the previous podcast, he came out firing on all cylinders in the beginning. 3 out of 3 catches, being a really good security blanket for Lamar on the run. He kind of did fade off in the last half. Some of it, not the best throws by Lamar. One of them was a safe throw by Lamar, but it was incomplete. I think we had the game in hand to the point where we didn't need to force feed receivers. So it kind of played away from getting Bateman more involved, but he produced well this game.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that there were some safe throws made. Bateman in the corner of the end zone towards the left pylon dove for a ball that Lamar was being safe with the football, and it came up a little short. Probably Bateman had a little space that he could have caught the ball if it was a little higher, but I understand the need to be safe in that situation. You have the game well in hand, and you want to leave the ball out there. But anyway, he did the same thing to Beckham on one throw where Beckham almost had it in terms of scooping that ball off the turf, and then the replay angle clearly showed he didn't. But I thought that there was some probably some yards left on the field to Bateman. He hasn't done really well in these 3 weeks since Andrew's been out, which is unfortunate. The circumstances for the passing game were absolutely gorgeous in the game against the Rams in particular, with the wet field, lousy pass rush conditions, great top of the route conditions. And Bateman didn't really get a big piece of that. So it would have been nice if he'd have made a couple plays in that game, had the ball thrown to him a couple times on some deeper options where he had a chance to get behind the defense. And unfortunately, it didn't happen there.
And it was it seemed like Lamar did try and force it to him, especially after he got the touchdown to Beckham. It seemed like he wanted to get Bateman incorporated in way quicker than naturally he could have got incorporated, which made some unforced errors.
Yeah, I like the natural incorporation in this game. I like to see him go to him on extended plays twice, right away. I mean, that was just beautiful. So.
And also not be scared to go him on the first read. I think there's been times where Bateman wins off the line of scrimmage and we miss him because he's not the main read. And I think him giving up on that deep route in versus LA might be a product of that, where he's been running hard all season and the one ball he doesn't expect to get, he kind of slows up. And I think if we continue to go to him maybe a little more earlier and often like this game, it continue to keep him locked in through the rest of the game.
Yeah. You need a high motor if you're playing with Lamar Jackson, because the play might last 9 seconds.
Yep.
So you got to keep running your route. And when that route's done, you got to figure out where else you can find space. All right, let me come up with a second guy. We'll talk about. I really liked what Justice Hill did in this game in terms of his pass blocking. So I'll hit on that again. He's good as a runner as well. Made some decent runs in this game. What did he have? He had 6 for 30 something, or what do you have? He had 5 for 23, so 4.6 yards, long of 8. No exceptional runs in this game. Don't believe he caught a ball. 0 for 1 in terms of targeting, but he sure as heck earned his spot out there with some great pass blocking. I think we mentioned one of these earlier. Forget if it was in this show or the earlier show. By the way, go back and download that first show. A lot of great stuff with Frazier. Going all the way through that, a lot of scheme stuff that I think you'd find very interesting. So please give that a download. But I thought that what Hill did as a pass blocker really earned his spot. And he really showed in this game more than any other game this season why the Ravens trust him so much on third down.
Yeah, and I think going into the season, that's something that we talked about, that he would be that third down back, and he would be the person we look to make those blocks and also be the leak out option if Lamar needs it. I think he did have a good game, and now with the unfortunate loss of Keaton Mitchell, it's going to be crucial he continues to show that he can be the speed back that we thought he was going to be before all the injuries, just continuing to grow his confidence within the offense.
Yeah. Who's your next guy?
My next guy will be Ricard. I think he had a good game. Very impactful game because we did come out in the second half and dominate them on the ground, and a lot of that has to do with Ricard. He's continued to show his value in a sense that when people were questioning if he should even be on the team based on the scheme, now he's seeming to be even more invaluable than we can expect, because we've seemingly put in the same formula from 2019 into these games, getting up early and being able to run the clock down and pound out some good yardage on these teams and making sure that we salvage these wins.
I think it's a great point. I mean, it's a lot of Ricard's value is game script based. And so if the Ravens are getting ahead, that's when you really do not want to be without Patrick Ricard and his ability to help you close out a football game. Gus Edwards has done his job there, even though his yards per carry are way down this year. He's the guy who gets all the unsexy, finish this game off for us carries that often end up being 2.5 yards apiece because the other team knows it's coming. And he's done better than that. But still not. He's hurt his career average significantly with this season in terms of what's happened. It's not a function of him failing by any stretch at all. It's a function of where the Ravens are using him. The other thing they're using him in is a lot of he's kind of their designated touchdown scorer. From 1 yard outs. Well, guess what? When you run from the 1 yard line, your average carry is probably negative.
Yep.
I know the average offensive play is negative from the 1 yard line, but the average carry is almost certainly negative as well. So it's a tough spot to run from, but he's got 11 touchdowns to help himself get over it.
I think going back to Ricard, he did have one really impressive block on the Gus Edwards run where he had the ball out like a loaf of bread. I think he manhandled that 3-tech. I mean, he just pushed him straight to the ground. He tried to get the opposite side of the leverage, and he just said nope and just pushed him right down. That was very impressive.
Very rare to see, by the way, that a tight end or tight end / fullback, even whatever you want to consider Ricard, if you even want to consider him an offensive lineman in some ways, can take his man directly to the ground like that. It's even rare for an offensive lineman to do it, a tackle to do it on an inside move that's right at the line of scrimmage. Where you do sometimes see it happen is where the an edge rusher takes a chance getting to the outside, then he can get taken to the ground, or when there's space created but between that interior rusher, he can end up getting taken to the ground. But this is right at the line of scrimmage, and Ricard just took him to the ground right away. It was a very impressive play.
Yeah, I mean, just head up. I mean, you're moving another human being. That's ridiculous by Ricard.
Yeah. All right, so you brought up Ricard. I'll bring up Likely. And I thought this was just the game for Isaiah Likely. It could be thought of as the breakout game from his career, and what he's done these last 3 weeks. The first game, he had a bunch of yards after the catch. He had 40 receiving yards and 44 yak in that first game. So that's great. It's good to show that you can make moves after the catch. But this game was all about trust at the catch point, about trusting him on some extended plays, about him making an extended space for himself on an extended play one time, about him being exactly in the right spot to look back for that touchdown on the seam route on the towards the right side. It's just this is a fantastic game. If Lamar doesn't come out of this game just having a complete feeling that I need to look for Isaiah Likely on this 3rd down and 7, I don't know what changes are going to help. Because they may be, just in a tough spot without Andrews if that's the case. But Likely has completely filled the Andrews role these last three weeks with, I think I've said it already on the previous show, but 19 targets and 193 yards. So 10.2 yards per target over this 3-week period.
Yeah. And I think he gained 10 extra points with that jump ball. I think that's the kind of play a quarterback remembers every single time he steps on the field. I mean, I don't know. We've seen Andrews make that play for him 100 times. I think likely making that play is it's perfect for the situation we have right now.
Now, the whole trust points thing is obviously an artificial currency that doesn't really exist. It's us notionally talking about it. But I did hear about a youth soccer coach doing this. He's basically a bunch of 8-year-olds to 10-year-olds are basically playing soccer. They're just getting their first experience with team sports and whatnot. And he's an English guy, and he basically was telling everybody that they earned, that's 5 Scooby-Doo bonus points for you. That's 2 Scooby-Doo. And that's all the kids would talk about after they'd had practice. Well, I got 2 on that play, and you got 5 on that play. It's like, this currency is working. All right, whose turn is it? We just talked about likely, right? So it's your turn.
I'll go with Beckham. He not an exciting game for Beckham at all. I think he did have one really clutch catch by Lamar where Lamar got blasted in the pocket and he just sat there and he delivered it like a playoff quarterback would. And he came up with the catch that was really good. He missed the great throw by Lamar to improv, kind of a jump throw. And I think that was like the third quarter. Either way, he dropped it, and that would have been a good play, but I think we ended up scoring on the drive anyway. So Beckham didn't really have a great game. He did come up limping on that fade route that Lamar threw to him. They cut it away to him on one of the defensive drives, and he looked to have some kind of massage gun at his ankle. So I'm not really sure what that's about. We know he's usually going to have some kind of nick or bruise here somewhere. So I think he didn't have a really good game going in today, but just not seeing him frustrated is a good sign.
Yeah, it's obviously 14 yards is not what you want out of your $18 million receiver or your $15 million receiver, but he had only 38 snaps played in the game. He may have been dealing with an injury, as you mentioned, with any kind of muscle rubbing going on there. Could be cramps, could be just some dehydration involved. But in truth, if you don't expect musculoskeletal problems from a player his age, you're just not being honest with yourself. Yep. You're going to fool yourself, and you're going to spend money on players you shouldn't. And so I think the Ravens have to be realistic about what they get from Beckham down the stretch. It would be great if Beckham could provide some significant playoff mojo for them. I mean, if you look around at who they've got who might be able to do that, maybe Zay Flowers can be a little better than he's been, particularly recently. Maybe Isaiah Likely can play at the same level. I don't think he could possibly be better than he's been these last 3 weeks. At least I don't see it. But then I look at the running back position. I'm like, oh my God, what are they going to do?
Yeah,
at running back. And so Beckham would be an offensive force that could really pay some dividends in this postseason. As long as we're talking about other players here, Charlie Kolar is probably another guy that they could increase the utilization of. Nice catch in this game. Did a bunch of really good blocking, which had not been true the entire season, but he's done some good blocking now. And so I think hopefully we'll see him more. He's a good closeout player, and I think that he's also a player. If you're going to be running YY sets, if you're going to be running 2 inline tight ends, or if you're just going to be using more 12 personnel and even 13 because you want blocking to help your tackles, then you got to try and find a way to use Kolar more as a receiver in that set. You might use him in the backfield, you might use him, as a move guy, but you've got to try and figure out how you can get him back integrated into the offense. They figured out with Likely almost immediately. So that's great. But try and get Kolar back in the offense. It would be really nice. He's had 2 catches this whole year so far.
Yeah, and the catch he did have in this game, he made a nice little move on Josh Allen to get open on the fire zone, and Lamar made a great read just to hit him real quick on a hot. But I don't know what else we could do for Kohler. I think when we look at Likely, he can run after the catch, so hitting him on screens is the natural thing to do. But with Kohler, I think he's such a big body. It's kind of like fitting him into that quote-unquote Andrews role and making him that middle threat in a sense.
I agree. I mean, he's a seam runner. You want to try and get him behind the linebacker. You want to try and get him in front of a safety. He's also a catch point guy. That's who he was at Iowa State in terms of being a guy who would box out a defender around him. He was good at catching the ball away from his bodies. We just haven't seen the consistency in terms of catching at the NFL level so far. I think some of that is a function of just not having a lot of playing time at all. Yep. So he's, whenever he goes into a game, he's cold. Pressure has got to be enormous on him to try and catch the football when it comes to him. Anyway.
Yeah, I can definitely understand the pressure part because I know it's tough when a player tries to just step in and play the role. I mean, we see when Isaiah Likely, he's had his untimely drops when Mark Andrews is the starter in the game and he's coming off the bench, and we've seen what Likely can do when he's the starter. He's performing to Andrews' level, not at his real level, but we know that those are big shoes to fill. But I think, like you said, just getting him in those high point situations, continuing to utilize him in the red zone like we did this week, I think those can serve well for his confidence going forward.
Okay. I am tapped out on individual skill position players I want to talk about. We talked about the whole offensive line. We talked about Lamar. Is there anybody else you want to hit on before we move on to the mailbag?
I think I'm good.
Okay. We got one question. It's a little bit of a defense question, but we can handle it, right? AngeLove85 says, it seems to me that one of the weaknesses of the defense is inconsistency. This question came in yesterday. I think there was another question today from him or her that I want to try and get. And I just want to make sure I've still got it here somewhere because I think we answered that one yesterday. Oh, I am sorry about this, but I think we've lost your question. So AngeLove85, please ask it again. But I believe we've answered this question already about the choice the defense is making basically to stop the pass and not stop the run as much. So I'll read this question again. It seems to me that one of the weaknesses of the defense is the inconsistency stopping the run. Do you believe it's scheme like Dallas, who is built to stop the pass, or fatigue? A game like Buffalo from yesterday can kill the defense. And hashtag Filmstudy mailbag. So I'm pretty sure I already did this question, but I will say I think it's completely a matter of choice for the Ravens defense. I think they've decided they're going to continue with the two deep shell to start that is going to be rotatable, that they're going to play matchup zone. They're going to do whatever the hell they want coming out of that to confuse you in the passing game. And if you look at what they've given up versus the run, I think they've more than earned that back in terms of how they've held down opposing passing games.
And I think the biggest key to them having the choice and having the confidence in the two deep and letting them run the ball is you have to have confidence in your offense to score, to make those kind of decisions. And it seems like we're playing complementary football defensively and offensively. So whenever you have those two things working for you, obviously in the LA game, it got out of hand quick in the sense of going back and forth, trying to score. In the first drive, we saw that they drove down the field very effectively on the run. But as the game progressed, they shied away because you can't do that in a shootout. So I think the Ravens understand their game plan is to get the lead and hold the lead. And you don't really need to worry about the run in that situation.
Yeah, really good point is that you can take a few more chances when you know you're not going to be completely handcuffed in terms of scoring points. And the Ravens, it's not only that they've scored points, they've led the entire season pretty much. Mm-hmm. They've 90% plus of the season they've led. It's one of the highest totals in NFL history, at least since the merger, when I believe they have good information from. But the
only two comparative teams is the 72 Dolphins and the 07 Patriots.
So a couple of undefeated teams they're in the same league with, and it does kind of go hand in hand that you lead most of the game and you end up winning most of those games.
Yep. I mean, we should technically be undefeated, but that's a whole different combo for a different story. But
all right. So, Frazier, always really appreciate talking football with you. Oh, we have one thing to do left, and that is name our 3 MVPs from this game. So I have my 3 ready to go. Do you have 3 for a 3, 2, 1 countdown?
Yep, I have 3, 2, 1.
Who's your number 3 guy?
Number 3 is Keaton Mitchell. Unfortunately, he went down with the injury this game, but he just provides a spark that we cannot replace. And this game was another sign of that. He had a lot of patience, showing that he can hit the hole effectively and wait for the blocks to develop. It was encouraging to see him do that this game, and it's disappointing to see that we won't be enjoying that moving forward this season.
Yeah, obviously a very frustrating one. Harbaugh rarely gets emotive about injuries. It looked like on the sideline, the weight of the Mitchell injury was really hitting him.
Yeah.
Now he wasn't cursing. He didn't have his head down. He wasn't shaking his head, because he tries not to do that. He clearly is trying to be very careful about that. But clearly losing a player like this is a very big deal. And, he's a priority free agent they went out and got. They exactly met their needs in terms of who he is and what he brings to the game, family connection. And, you just have to wonder, will he ever be the same again? And I don't know if I've said it on the show, but it's the only comparable rookie injury I can recall is Lardarius Webb going down in 2009. He went down at the end of that year. It was frustrating as hell because it was a great Ravens team, by the way. Despite the fact they were 9-7, they were the best, for my money, of the first 5 Harbaugh years. And they could have easily made a deep run in the playoffs. They did go in and kick the crap out of New England in their ballpark, and then lost to the Colts 20-3. But Lardarius Webb was a hell of a football player that year. Missed basically the whole next year, and then came back, was the best corner in the entire league in 2011. So just frustrating as hell to have a young player like that hurt.
Yeah, it's going to be hurt. It's going to be tough to replace, I think. It's going to be disappointing when we see Melvin Gordon touching the ball.
Yeah, it's too disappointing. So my number 3 guy is Tyler Linderbaum for me. He played the best of the offensive linemen. I have 2 skill position players ahead of him, but you're thinking about what kind of year he's had. It's really him and Zeitler who have been the stars on the offensive line, and one of them should probably be in your thinking in terms of the MVP votes, the possibility of making the Pro Bowl and whatnot. As much as this offensive line's had a lot of problems at tackle and a lot of penalty issues at left guard, they are still one of the better offensive lines in the National Football League, largely because of continuity. And Linderbaum's been a big part of that. He's played extremely well since he's come back from his injury in particular.
Yeah, I'm loving Linderbaum this year. The size doesn't seem to be hindering him like he did his rookie year. I think he's continuing to show progression in that area. Only 1 hiccup on snaps all year, which is great. I think maybe a handful out of the frame, but Lamar's athletic enough to grab that down. But it's just what the doctor ordered from 2020 and 2021. I think Linderbaum has continued to be a cornerstone player for this offense, and he will be for the next decade if we continue to sign him.
All right, who's your number 2 guy?
My number 2 guy is Isaiah Likely. Another impactful game, another great game by Likely, showing that he can step up when our top guy is not available and none of the receivers are making too many plays. He was our top guy as a pass catcher all day. Like you mentioned, getting open on that touchdown was great. The improv play to Likely by Lamar in the first quarter, that was amazing. And then obviously the leaping catch over the defender, who in all reality should have intercepted that ball.
Yep.
But Likely going up strong and being able to grab that and giving Lamar that trust was big time for me.
Yeah, love seeing that from a young receiver. We've seen it from Bateman earlier this season. Likely just right place, right time all night in terms of what he did, and that included, as you said, making some space on an extended play as well. So he's also my number 2 guy. Who's your number 1 guy?
Let's guess here. Let's go 1, 2, 3. Lamar Jackson.
Yep, there you go.
I think it's inevitable at this point. He's the MVP of the team and most likely going to be MVP of the league coming up after Monday night. I think he is the glue to the team. He keeps the engine going. And like we mentioned in the last podcast, keeping him healthy and safe until January is the goal. That's it.
Absolutely. They got it exactly right in that Willy Wonka ripoff that he's the golden ticket for the Baltimore Ravens. Without him, they're not going to be competitive at all.
Or nothing.
Yeah, the defense can't win games on their own as good as they played, as well as they played. It's Lamar Jackson who brings the sizzle to this team and makes all 11 players on offense better. And I think you can make the argument based on the more they've been winning snap count as the season has gone on, that he really is making all 22 players better, keeping players rested on defense. And that was certainly a big deal in 2019 with that 80% series success rate they had. Was nobody could figure out how to get the Ravens off the field. And that was a huge advantage for the defense, always playing fresh, always jumping around, even though the defense, it was held together with duct tape in terms of who they had on that field a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think we got really spoiled with that 2019 season. I think the amount of success we had is just, we can't match that. It's really tough.
How many times did you hear after that season, he's only going to get better? There are things Lamar Jackson does better from a judgment perspective, but the notion that he would ever have as good a season as one of the greatest seasons in NFL history, I'm not saying it was impossible, because you never know what you've got exactly in terms of a young player, but I'm just saying it's very unlikely when you start with a season like that.
I think the main thing, if Lamar has a wall in front of him, I think he can have another MVP season regardless who his supporting cast is. And that was evident in 2019. He had a dominant offensive line and he took them where they needed to go. I think next season it has to be a priority. We've saying that for 3 years now, ever since 19. I think this season we have to be serious. We've invested in Lamar, and if you give this guy time, he can do anything. There's nothing he can't do.
So here's the question, and here's the ace of spades. If you want to try and replace Ronnie Stanley at left tackle, if you want to get your next generational left tackle, what if you had to tag and trade Matabike to do it?
That's a very, very
big ask. But that's the kind of thing it is. That's the sort of barrier the Baltimore Ravens have to replacing Ronnie Stanley. That's how hard it is, because whoever they get otherwise is going to be a 2-year solution if they get him in the second round and get an Osemele type prospect, say.
Mm-hmm. That's a very tough scenario you posed to me, because Matabike is almost a must sign after the season he's having. So it's almost pick your poison at that point. I think maybe, you can't, I would say maybe tag Queen and potentially flip him. But
nobody's going to trade for Queen. I mean, you're lucky if Queen maximizes his full value the way he's played down the stretch here, and you get the 3rd round comp pick out of it. Yeah, I think the Ravens actually very lucky. They might only end up getting a 4th out of it. Probably they get a 3rd, but they might only get a 4th. And then Geno Stone has not played as well since he got his 6th interception. He's pretty much accumulated a bunch of missed tackles. Mm-hmm. So that's been unfortunate. I mean, the Ravens defense in general has been quite good, and Stone being on the back end patrolling that has been a part of it. I don't want to minimize what he's done for the Ravens, but he's missed a lot of tackles in this season as a whole, and hasn't had the offsetting contributions of interceptions since his last one.
Yep, very true.
All right, Frazier, always incredible fun talking football with you. Want to get you back on the show again as soon as possible. I believe you may have one more show still coming up this season. Is that right?
Not sure if I have an offensive defensive show, but obviously the matchups every week.
All right. Well, great. We'll look forward on that. Tell folks otherwise where they can talk football with you.
You guys can reach me at Twitter/X at F_RAVE8. That's F_Rave8.
All right. Outstanding. Other folks out there, if you want to be on a film study short, hit me up. DM's always open on Twitter. You guys know the drill by now, and I'm getting a lot of good ideas for this. Please give various levels of content a try. If we're asking the most loyal listeners of all how they can support the show, we're not asking for money. I don't do that in terms of going out there. That may have to change in the future, but I would ask that you teach somebody who maybe isn't familiar with how to use podcasts, how to directly access from the filmstudybaltimore.com website the ability to listen to a pod. A lot of people will do that, but they won't, go listen to a podcast on a podcast app because they just don't use that on their phone. And being an older guy myself, I understand that weakness. Frazier, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.